Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 129 on the Pranzata Podcast here on YouTube. Before we get into it, if you are new to this channel and you like what you hear today, please don't forget to hit subscribe. I am very close to my first 1,000 subscribers, and that's really where the magic starts to happen on here, where I can really grow this channel and possibly make this a career. So give it a listen. If you like it, hit subscribe. If you don't hit subscribe. Totally up to you. Okay. So this episode is going to be my thoughts about this current election, the 2024 presidential election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. I just want to preface this by saying I am not a professional politician. I am not a professional political commentator, and this is not a political podcast. This is a podcast where I talk about just open ideas, anything that's on my mind. And right now, this election is very much on my mind. So I also want to give a little background about who I am and what my political beliefs are. Right now, I consider myself in the center politically. Traditionally, a lot of my beliefs definitely lean more towards the left and towards the side of liberals. However, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I do believe that I speak for a lot of people when I say that right now, I am losing faith in the two-party system, which is exactly what is pushing me more in the center and away from the left. And as a result of that, I am actually incredibly confused about who to vote for this election. And again, I do not want to be presumptuous, but I have a feeling that a lot of American voters right now are feeling the exact same way. As a matter of fact, I think it's most likely that a lot of people are feeling this exact same way. And that's why this is such a tense election season. I think both the left and the right have both branched off into such extremes. And I do believe that both the left and the right are being lied to in many ways on the media. And that's why so many people feel this sense of frustration, because people, and I'm speaking for myself, but I do believe I'm speaking for many people just want to do the best thing for the country. And I think because people are being fed so many different opposing messages from the left and the right, it's sort of pushing people into confusion, almost to the point where I think many people don't even want to vote at all. And I'll be honest, I'm one of those people that I feel so confused that there is a big part of me that does not want to vote at all. However, I do not want to do that. I do want to vote this election. I just need a little more time and a little more investigation on which side is at least closer to the truth. I do believe both sides are lying, but I want to make my best educated guess. And at the end of the day, I just want to do what I believe is best for the people. There's a lot of anxiety around that because there's a fear of selecting the wrong candidate. But I want to do my best. So what I did today to try to help work out this stress in my mind, and also to serve as an open discussion for the people listening, if they have a more clear decision and they have some insight that I'm not seeing in some of my points, or if you're also an undecided voter like me, and you want to just be a part of this discussion. So let's get right into it. I made a list of 3 positives about each candidate, 3 negatives about each candidate, and also 3 undecideds about the election in whole. Now, obviously, this list could be larger, but I can ramble on here. I apologize for that in advance. Please drop in the comment section below if you think I was rambling too much, because I have a tendency to do that, and I'm working on it. But to avoid myself from rambling, I tried to sum this down to 3 points each. So here we go. My first list is about Donald Trump, and I listed 3 positive things about Donald Trump and why I would be inclined to vote for him this election. The first thing I wrote is that he is thick-skinned and he can handle the stress of being president. One really interesting thing about him is I've noticed that he hasn't really aged much the way a lot of the other presidents have. If you look at the history of presidents like Obama, Biden, etc., you can see how, while of course Biden went into the election already with some physical decline, the difference between the beginning and the end was massive. And the same could be said for Obama. Obama was always like a young, energetic, very attractive man. And by the end of his term, you could see the gray hairs growing in on his head. I think Donald Trump has very thick skin. He seems to be able to handle the stress, the constant stress of being president. And I do think that is a positive quality. Now, while that could come with some negatives, for somebody to have that thick skin, that could also potentially point to the idea that they could be a little bit of a psychopath. At the end of the day, I actually do think it's a very positive quality to have thick skin as a president. Okay, the second thing I put on here for a positive about Donald Trump is that I believe he is less threat of freedom of speech if he is president. I do believe that the right seems to have more passion towards protecting the freedom of speech of the American people. So I do believe under Donald Trump's presidency that there will more likely be a greater protection in freedom of speech. I think freedom of speech gets a lot of criticism from the left in particular, but in my opinion, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, I used to do stand-up comedy, and I'm planning to start doing stand-up comedy again. Freedom of speech, I think, is detrimental for the arts in particular, and for so many other things, but I can only speak for myself from the arts. I'm a YouTuber, and I do want to have a free exchange of ideas on this podcast. So the idea that certain topics could be shadow banned because they are off limits, I do find that incredibly threatening as an artist. Also, in general, I do miss when movies and music were a little bit looser, in particularly movies. I miss funny movies like Borat, and I think a lot of those things have become dumbed down, and people are afraid of insulting other people because these very strict restrictions on what is appropriate to say. So as an artist, I actually do believe in freedom of speech, even though I'm mostly liberal. I think that it's a mistake for the liberals to avoid wanting to support freedom of speech. Okay, so the third thing I put that is a pro about Donald Trump is that he is more transparent of a person politically. What you see is what you get with Donald Trump. Even if what you see is an asshole, he is more transparently an asshole, which I actually think is a positive, believe it or not. Okay, so now I have a list of 3 positives about Kamala Harris. Number 1, she has more potential to be well articulated and put together during events where communication is important. I know historically in the past, she had been criticized for not being good with public speeches and rambling and repeating things in circles. But I think from this last presidential debate, it's obvious that she is coachable and trainable into being a better public speaker. I think while Donald Trump, he speaks off the cuff, sometimes that is a negative for him because he says stupid things and gets himself in trouble, which causes a lot of controversy in the media, etc. I do think communication skills as a president is very important, especially when there's global tensions, wars going on, etc. So I do think the ability to be able to communicate productively and in a well-presented fashion is incredibly important as a president. Now, I do see that there is an argument to be made that there are some things about Donald Trump that could make him a better communicator. The fact that he does speak off the cuff and not in a scripted type of manner could be a positive because at least it feels like it's a more transparent and honest conversation, which could be a pro when communicating with foreign nations. However, I do think Kamala, she is becoming more well put together in her conversational skills. Okay, the second thing I put on what is a positive about Kamala Harris, which could make me think about voting for her more than Trump, is that she wants to legalize abortion in all 50 states. Now, this one might get some criticism from the right, but I do want to point out that, and this is, by the way, this is not meant to insult anybody. I also want to side note make that clear. When I have a criticism on either the left or the right, it is not intended to insult anybody. It's intended to have an open discussion about the potential holes in one side, because I do not believe that there is all good and all bad on either side. I think it's our responsibility as people to steer away from this extreme emotional reaction to political debate and bring it down to a human level. So please, I don't mean to insult anybody. But anyways, I do think that there is a little bit of hypocrisy on the far right in regards to criticizing legalizing abortion. And the reason I think that is a hypocrisy is because I think one of the biggest things on the right that is important to the people on the right is that they believe in freedom. However, I don't believe that it's good to cherry pick which freedoms are appropriate and which freedoms are inappropriate. I want freedom of speech, but with that, I don't get to cherry pick which freedoms are good and which freedoms are bad. If I want freedom of speech, I also want freedom of control over bodies. And that even includes freedom of what is morally appropriate in one person's perspective versus the other. I don't criticize anybody's perspective if they believe that abortion is immoral. I think you have the right to that perspective. However, with freedom comes the freedom to make choices that are possibly not aligned with your moral values, especially in very dire life circumstances where, for example, a woman's life might be at threat if she goes through with a full pregnancy term and gives birth, or if a woman was raped and she became pregnant out of her own control. I think these are situations in which flexibility and compromise needs to be made. And while you have the right to say that it is immoral to get an abortion, even under the circumstances in which the pregnancy was forced on a person and not chosen, but at the same time, those other people have the right to think differently and to do what they want with their body. So that's where I stand with that. Thirdly, I do think Kamala Harris is a positive in this way, that she is not on the extreme left. I do think that the far left liberals will obviously disagree with me on that because they want somebody who's on the far left. I know Bernie Sanders was a very popular figure for people on the far left. However, I actually think that right now, the fact that she is not on the far left, you know, she had a history of working in the criminal justice system. She owns a gun, which she stated in the last debate. I actually think that's a positive because going back to what I said before, I do believe that there is a strong divisiveness in the country. And I do think we kind of need to pull back a little bit. So personally, I feel more comfortable with somebody who isn't so extreme right now. So I actually personally like that she has some conservative qualities to her, but that the majority of her values are still on the left. That aligns with my beliefs personally. Okay, so I've said the good. Now I'm going to bring up the bad, which I think are negative qualities about each individual candidate. And I'm going to begin with Donald Trump. Okay, so my first point I made here on this list was that he tends to avoid answering confrontational questions in public debates or public interviews. And I might go as far to say as that he even sort of gaslights the listeners in public debates and public interviews with these questions. And I'm going to give a concrete example so you understand what I'm talking about. And again, this is not an insult. I know the Trumpers are very passionate. I put out a video a few days ago about the election, and the Trumpers were very passionately defensive of Donald Trump. I'm not necessarily saying that this makes or breaks him. I'm just pointing this out as an objective fact. So, for example, he did tweet something about Joe Rogan, which was negative. You have to look up the exact tweet because I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something on the lines of that he was angry that Joe Rogan was endorsing JFK and he thinks that Joe Rogan is a joke. It was a very insulting and demeaning type of tweet. Now, he was confronted this on the Lex Fridman podcast, which, by the way, big kudos to Lex Fridman for attempting to give a raw interview of Donald Trump. But when he was confronted about this tweet about Joe Rogan, he kind of denied it. And he was like, I don't have any issues with Joe Rogan. I never said that. In my opinion, that makes me lose a little bit of trust and credibility with him, because I think if he said these things, it's a mistake to just kind of gaslight the interviewer and the listeners to making it out like it wasn't a big deal. Just own up to the things that you said. You know what I mean? Or another example of this is in the debate with Kamala Harris. He was confronted towards the end of the debate about his remarks about Kamala Harris's race. Now, I mentioned this on the last podcast, and a lot of the Trumpers got really, really offended when I brought this up. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying he's a racist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when he was confronted to talk about those comments he made about Kamala Harris's race, he didn't talk about it openly. If he has a point to say, and if he truly believes that Kamala Harris is playing into the race card to win the vote of the African American population, if that's a statement he made and he believes in, why wouldn't he stand by that statement when he was confronted about it at the debate? In my opinion, that's a mistake he's making, and he loses credibility a little bit in my eyes when he does stuff like that. So I just wish he would own up to some of the stuff he says when he's confronted about it. Okay, so the next negative point I made about Donald Trump is that he has a history of sexual scandals, and to me, I want a president with integrity. I believe that what you do in your family could potentially be a microcosm of how you would behave in a larger picture. So I do think it is a negative thing that he has a history of cheating on his wife and sexual scandals, etc. I do want somebody who has integrity in their personal life and their public life. That could just be my biased opinion, but that is something I do believe in. Thirdly, he doesn't want to offer help towards people with student loan debt. Now, this could be a potentially biased opinion because I'm somebody who has student loan debt. So this is from my personal opinion because that's something that I'm personally passionate about. I had brought this up in extent on my previous podcast, episode number 128. So if you want to hear more in detail about why I believe that there should be more relief for student loan debt, you can take a listen to that. But in a nutshell, I do think that there is some unfairness that student loan debt could not be dismissed in a bankruptcy under circumstances in which somebody is severely ill. And I even go as far as to say that I don't even necessarily think that we should completely forgive student loan debt. As a matter of fact, I don't believe we should completely forgive student loan debt. But I'm willing to compromise that in a situation where somebody has a serious illness or a serious injury, etc., and they are not able to work multiple jobs to pay off the debt, which they made the decision to sign for, I believe that at the very least, there should be something in place to stop the interest from accumulating on the debt. So let's say somebody has a $90,000 loan term and that's how much they took out for college. That could easily build up and skyrocket to much more than that if somebody is in a situation where they are physically ill. And if these things are able to be terminated in bankruptcy, I don't see why there isn't assistance for student loan debt to be included in bankruptcy, especially in situations where people are suffering from really dire life consequences. Now, the fact that Donald Trump is not willing to budge on that does give me a little more evidence that he personally is not in favor of helping the struggling American people. Now, that is my subjective opinion, and I'm sure that will insult some of his fans, but I really do believe that. Okay, now to go to some negative points about Kamala Harris. Just like Donald Trump, when I said the point that I think what you do in your personal life could be a microcosm on how you behave in larger pictures, I do feel the same way about Kamala Harris. She does have an alleged history of wrongfully convicting innocent people for her own financial gain. Now, I don't know how true this is. That's why I included the word alleged history, but I do feel like there is a lot of evidence out there that there could be some truth in this. And if this is true, I do not want a person like this as president, because I also believe that this is not a sign of a person with good integrity. Again, I do not know what the truth is surrounding this, but if this is true, I would go as far as to say that this is far worse than having a sexual scandal. Of course, I don't like cheaters and I don't think cheating is good, but wrongfully convicting people for your own financial gain is way worse than cheating, in my opinion. So there is something to be said with that if there is truth about that. Okay. The second thing I want to say here is that when she was confronted in the past about Biden's poor performance at the debate, on the first presidential debate against Biden and not Kamala Harris, she absolutely refused to admit his weaknesses. To me, that lost a little bit of trust and it made her lose some credibility because it was glaringly obvious to the American people that Biden was not physically fit and physically well to be doing that debate. When she was confronted about this in an interview, and you guys can do your research to try to find this interview so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, if it hasn't been removed already, but she absolutely would not admit that he was ill. She kept saying that, I don't know what anybody's talking about. Biden is the best he's ever been. Now, I feel like as a listener, I feel insulted and gaslighted by that statement because it's clear and plain as day that he's not well. Just admit it. Just own up to it. That's the funny thing about this is that some of these, these presidential candidates and these politicians, they don't want to show any signs of weakness, but by showing signs of weakness and just admitting your own faults, you actually become more trustworthy. So I don't understand. I wish maybe they're coached to not give away weakness and I don't know what goes on behind the curtain. So maybe these people are trained, don't tell the answer or I will kill you. You know what I mean? There could be stuff going on behind there that is beyond my knowledge. But I just think as an American voter or just as an average American voter, if somebody owned up and said, yeah, we were wrong, I would trust that person. So I just think it's wild, how politicians are so resistant to show signs of weakness. Okay, so my third point about what I think is a negative about Kamala Harris is under the Biden presidency, a lot of promises went undelivered. So I fear that because she was so closely tied with Biden, that the same thing will happen. I'll be honest, if I'm just going by their talking points and about what they promised to deliver to the American people, I like her better. A lot of the things she talks about and a lot of the things that she talked about in the debate were preferable in my eyes to what I would want to see in the future. However, there is doubt that she could follow through on those promises because of a point that Donald Trump had made, which I think he made rightfully, that they had promised to help people with student loan debt find financial freedom. They attempted to do that and they were not able to deliver the promises. So while I do like a lot of what she promises, I do not have faith that she has the power to follow through with those promises. Okay, so lastly, and to make this clear, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I am an undecided voter. So I included 3 major questions that I think will make or break my decision. And I, again, don't want to be presumptuous, but I think a lot of people are struggling to find the answers to these same questions. My first question is, who is a greater threat to democracy, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? Now, at first glance, it would almost seem like an insult that I would even ask that question. Based on the media, it would seem obvious that Donald Trump is a greater threat to democracy. However, I do think there is a lot of evidence that can show that both candidates could be a threat to democracy. And let me explain my point of view. There is a lot of strikingly obvious evidence, if you do some research about this, that a lot of the modern technology is being programmed to prefer the Democratic Party. Now, one could pose the argument that it's for a positive reason. One could pose the argument that they believe that Donald Trump is so dangerous that they're doing this for the welfare of the American people. However, it is still technically a threat to democracy to even force things on the American people that benefit them. because the whole point of a democracy is to have fairness and equality and a fighting chance for everybody to voice their opinion. That's the whole point of democracy. So I think with that, if you want to stay true to the integrity of a democracy, you have to even allow bad ideas to be put out there so that there is a fair and fighting chance for all parties. So with that being said, I do not think it is right to force ideas down Americans' throats. Now listen, when I do my own research and my own reading on these topics, I might come to the same exact conclusion as you. I might do my research and say, you know what? I don't like Donald Trump. But regardless, I deserve the right to investigate that all by myself and not be pushed towards a particular side. And if you want to do research on this on your own, go ahead and do that so you can see what I'm talking about. But if I can just give you in a nutshell some of the things I'm talking about, there has been a lot of experiments done with ChatGPT that shows that ChatGPT is actually on the left. That if you ask ChatGPT political questions, that it will actually spit out information that is more in favor of the viewpoints of the left. I think that the American people and the American voters have a right to do their own research and make their own decision and make their own conclusions based 100% on objective fact with no leniency towards any particular side. I think the American people have that right. And I think with that being said, there is an argument to be made that Kamala Harris is equally a threat, if not more a threat to democracy than Donald Trump. Now, let me make this clear. That does not mean that I think Donald Trump is a good person. I'm not saying I like Donald Trump. I'm just saying that there is an argument to be made that both parties are a threat to democracy. Okay, the second thing that I am undecided with about this election is who would be a better face to communicate with foreign leaders? Or put more bluntly, which one of these two presidential candidates would be less likely to inspire Putin to press the red button, if I'm going to be completely blunt about that? I had said earlier in the podcast that there is an argument to be made for both. Donald Trump speaks more off the cuff, and he's more transparent of a person in general. That could be a pro or a con for foreign communications. On one hand, you can argue that because he's speaking off the cuff, that he could be more trustworthy of a person and be able to incite more peace. Or on the other side, one could argue that he could be more easily manipulated because of this as well. And again, with Kamala Harris, the same thing goes. On one hand, you could say because she is more well put together and well presented, and she's obviously, based on the last debate, more coachable as a person when it comes to public speaking. And I'm not saying she's been a great public speaker her entire life. That's obvious. But I'm saying right now she's obviously doing much better. So she's got the potential to be a great public speaker and a communicator. Because of that, I do think there's an argument to be made. She could be coached and trained on how to properly communicate, or because I think she doesn't speak so much off the cuff in the same nature that Donald Trump does, she might actually not be able to build trust amongst foreign leaders because maybe they prefer talking to somebody who seems more transparent. I don't know. I have no idea. That's why I'm bringing this up and posing this as an undecided question, because this is very confusing to me and I don't know what is the correct path. Okay, lastly and thirdly, to conclude the podcast, my last undecided question about this election is, what is the correct path in regards to war? Is it better to be an ally and to get involved because there is a bigger historical picture that I am unable to grasp and understand based on my lack of historical knowledge as an average American voter? Or is it better to be completely uninvolved because that's only going to aggravate the conflict even further? I don't know. That is something that I am completely unqualified to make an educated guess on. And because of that, I would actually like to see a second debate between Trump and Kamala Harris, because I think this needs to be explored a little bit more. They did explore it in the previous debate, but again, as somebody who I feel like you would have to have a pretty good understanding of politics and history and an understanding of war to be able to make a better educated guess about this. As an average American person, I have no idea. I don't know what is the correct thing to do. And I do think that that is a thing that when people have a better understanding on what's better to do, that could make or break this election on the stances between Trump and Kamala Harris on who believes that they should be more actively involved and an ally, and who believes that they should remove themselves from the equation and not get involved. I think that's really important, and I don't understand that. I don't know. I'm clueless. So that is actually a big one for me. Okay, so that's actually been the entire podcast. I encourage people to weigh in on any of the questions I posed, weigh in on any of the points I made. Again, I want to reiterate that anything I said that was critical of anybody's point of view, it is not meant to insult anybody. It is just my honest perspective of just one human being and the life I lived and where I'm at and the things I'm seeing from my current perspective. Also, I want to reiterate in the beginning of the podcast that I am so close to my first 1,000 subscribers. And as you may or may not know, 1,000 subscribers is where independent YouTubers have the potential to start growing and monetizing their podcast and turning it into a career. I really want to do podcasting as a career. So if you like what you heard today, please don't forget to hit subscribe so you can hear my future podcasts. And that's it, guys. Pranzata Podcast, episode number 129. Have a good day, guys. Bye.